How did The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild help me through lockdown? In this video, I will explore 5 reasons why I found this game useful in combating loneliness and feeling trapped. Welcome to Green Mushrooms. The world can be a dark and scary place, and sometimes it can get on top of us. But things are not all bad. There are experiences out there that can help raise us up, give us hope, and inspire us. Breath of the Wild was certainly one of those experiences for me. It's a well-known action-adventure game from Nintendo that released in 2017 to critical acclaim. In a departure from most games in the Legend of Zelda series, Breath of the Wild drops the player into an expansive open world and gives them the freedom to choose their own path. Nintendo's take on the open world genre was revolutionary for the Legend of Zelda series and, to some extent, for gaming in general. While it's by no means a perfect game, Breath of the Wild blew my mind the first time I played it. And I've experienced a renewed appreciation for it after starting a new game in the 2020 lockdowns. In fact, Breath of the Wild helped me through some of the worst of the isolation. How did it do this? Number 1. Freedom of movement. In a time when reality was restricting my ability to travel, Breath of the Wild gave me a vast and varied world to explore. After waking up in a mysterious cave surrounded by ancient technology, the disembodied voice of Princess Zelda informs you that you are the last hope for the land of Hyrule.
Link, you are the light. Our light. That must shine upon Hyrule once again.
Then, a door opens, you head outside and are greeted with this. A breathtaking view of mountains, forests, ruins, a glowing volcano, an ominous castle, and many other things just waiting to be explored. Because, unlike other games, this scenery is not just a backdrop. Everything you see can be reached and investigated, either on foot, or on horseback, or by climbing the nearest mountain and using your paraglider to fly there. The first time I booted up the game in 2017, I found this view mesmerizing, but also slightly overwhelming. Getting to grips with the sheer size of this world would be a mammoth task. Though actually, that turned out to be a good thing in 2020 when I started a new game, because despite spending over 100 hours in this world a few years ago, I was still able to discover new things, new places, new mysteries, new ways to interact with the environment. It's clear from the opening sequence that the star of the game is the world. Exploration and freedom are king, and they take precedence over things that might limit them, such as a linear story or structured pacing. Some people have criticised the game for this, but for me, Breath of the Wild's uncompromising openness is what kept me in the world for so long, and even encouraged me to return several years later. Number 2. The calming power of nature. There's something humbling about climbing a mountain or taking a walk through a forest. I find spending time with trees and rocks that have existed before me, and are likely to continue existing long after I'm gone, to be strangely reassuring. It reminds me that I'm part of something bigger, and there's no need to put pressure on myself to be anything in particular. Sometimes it's okay to just be, to just exist. Breath of the Wild is all about nature. This is obvious from the first area you encounter. The Zelda series is known for its lively music that embodies the essence of whatever area you happen to be in. And while the music in Breath of the Wild is still beautiful, it's somewhat sedated when compared to previous titles. It takes a step back to allow the calming sounds of nature to take center stage and help immerse you in this world. Breath of the Wild is one of the few games I've played where sometimes I just like to stop and look around while listening to the sound of the birds or the wind whistling through the trees. The type of thing I would do if I was standing in a real forest. While of course this is just a simulation, it still conjures up some of those same feelings of peace. And in parts of 2020 those feelings were hard to come by. Here in London there was a time when we were only allowed to leave our homes once a day for government-sanctioned exercise. And there were other places in Europe where people weren't allowed to go outside at all. Having a chance to escape my city flat to somewhere wild was hugely beneficial, even if it was only a virtual wild. Number 3. This game inspires your curiosity. I remember being a child and spending hours at a time in the garden looking at plants and insects, or gazing up at the sky and watching the clouds and the stars and the changing shape of the moon, trying to figure them out. Why are they there? How do they work? Engaging your curiosity leads to quality time you can spend on your own that feels rewarding. As a child, I never felt lonely when I was exploring the garden by myself, because at that time, myself was all I needed. Breath of the Wild taps into that feeling. Some critics of the game have said the world feels empty. I know what they mean, but I would disagree. The world is vast, and often you'll find an area that's just rocks or trees, but most of the time you can also see far into the distance, and there's usually something that sparks your curiosity. It could be a falling star, a strange glow, a mysterious floating object, or a weird-looking structure, something that makes you think, why is that there? How does it work? You figure out a way to get there in order to investigate, and when you're done, another thing catches your eye. You go explore that, and before you know it, 100 hours have passed and you've had a thoroughly pleasant time, all by yourself. Number 4. Breath of the Wild makes you feel clever. It helps you appreciate your own intelligence and creativity through puzzle solving. In traditional Zelda games, most of the puzzles would take place in dungeons, expertly designed areas that put your brain to the test. Breath of the Wild mixes this up with shrines. Shrines are like mini dungeons, usually containing 1 or 2 puzzles or something like a combat trial. Some people have criticised Breath of the Wild for its lack of traditional linear dungeons, the type that could take an hour or so to complete. The closest we get to them are the divine beasts, but to be honest, these are more like big shrines. It's clear why Nintendo did this. As we have already mentioned, in Breath of the Wild, freedom and exploration are king, and anything that might place limitations on freedom, like long linear dungeons, must take a back seat. I do understand the criticism of shrines, but again, the emphasis on freedom in Breath of the Wild is the reason I spent over 100 hours playing it in 2017, and why I returned in 2020. In particular, I find the flexibility offered by the game's physics engine to be extremely rewarding. In traditional Zelda games, or any games with challenging puzzles, you always feel clever when you work something out. But in Breath of the Wild, it's even more satisfying to use your understanding of the game's physics engine, often combined with mastery of the powers given to you at the beginning of the game, to essentially cheat or cheese your way through a challenge. Let me give you an example. One of the shrines features this ball in a maze puzzle. You have to use motion controls to tilt the maze in order to get the ball in its hole. This process is finicky and requires patience. It's also easy to mess up. But since this is a physics-based world, if you're not feeling particularly patient, you can always flip the maze upside down and use it like a bat. Getting the ball in the hole this way, I would argue, feels even more satisfying because it feels like you've somehow cheated the system. Of course, you haven't really, because Nintendo gave you the ability to work outside the box, but still, in a time when we're inundated by constantly changing rules, it's sometimes refreshing to be a little bit rebellious. And it's not just shrines. The whole world is essentially one big puzzle. Working out how to get from point A to point B requires you to use your brain, and there are always multiple methods to achieve the same thing. Working out weird and wacky ways to complete a task makes you feel good about yourself. I would say 2020 has made most of us a little extra vulnerable to stress and depression, so anything that makes us feel good about ourselves is greatly appreciated. Number 5. Breath of the Wild lets you go at your own pace. It's relaxing. Despite the fact that you are tasked with saving the world, you never feel under any real pressure in Breath of the Wild. It takes time to move from place to place, and there's always numerous things to get distracted by along the way. Hence, why I spent over 100 hours playing it. It's a slow game, but that's not a bad thing, especially in a world where we're constantly under pressure from society to do this, that, and the other. It's nice to take a break in a virtual sanctuary where we have the power to set the pace. If I want to spend 10 minutes picking mushrooms or working out how to mine some ore at the top of a cave, that's perfectly legitimate. Because in Breath of the Wild, the player decides what to do and when to do it. The player has control. That brings us to our conclusion. The world's fight against the pandemic has taken away a lot of our control. Many of us have lost loved ones. Many of us have lost jobs. Most of us have lost freedoms. But the world will get through this, and in the meantime, we need to look after ourselves. Revisiting Breath of the Wild helped me look after myself. While it didn't make me feel any less alone, it did make me less lonely. It helped me appreciate how much fun I could have by myself. It reminded me of that feeling of joy you get when you experience new places, and filled me with a renewed fascination for the mystery and power of nature. It inspired my curiosity and boosted my confidence by making me feel clever. But most of all, it gave me a whole world without pressure, where I could decide what to do and when to do it. This is Green Mushrooms. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like or consider subscribing. Are there any particular games that helped you during lockdown? If so, let me know in the comments below. Until next time, goodbye.